Welcome back to What Do You Know with Nick and Devin. I'm Nick.
And I'm Devin.
And this is The Daily. I love that. I remember when everyone was like really into The Daily. I'd be commuting to work and I'd be like, I'm Michael Barbaro, and this is The Daily.
I never listened to The Daily. I know what you're talking about. I know the joke.
Yeah.
And that's as far as my knowledge went.
It was, it was good. I'm sure it still is. It just kind of got a little, I think like when news really started to like saturate all platforms of like social media, entertainment, all of that, I think it just kind of became too much to also kind of deep dive into topics on something like The Daily. And people were like, okay, overload. You know what I mean?
That's fair.
Yeah. And also everything has its famous cycle.
Yeah.
Like do you put connections or anything like in it?
I fucking love connections.
Okay, connections, the mini. Do you do the mini crossword?
Allie normally does. We only have one account.
Oh, okay.
So like we just play it on her phone.
Do you do the big crossword too?
Sometimes, but not only in the beginning of the week when it's easier.
Not on a Sunday.
No. Spelling bee is great.
I like strands.
Strands is a new fun one.
It's fun. Yeah.
It's not an early morning game.
No.
It's a little tricksy in the morning, but we'll do connections and Wordle in the morning.
See, I don't do Wordle anymore. I don't know why. It's just like I'm over it. But connections is getting a little annoying too.
Yeah. Sometimes I just get really pissed at the New York Times.
Yeah. I just hate the ones where they're like, if you drop this third letter, like then all of them make an animal name, and you're like, okay, that's not a connect. You know what I mean?
Right,
like that's not. That's
just
fair. Annoying. You know what I mean?
I get it.
Apparently, there's a show called The 1% or something like that, where it's kind of like exactly.
I feel like we camped outside for that.
Correct. And I also feel like you can guess where I found out about this show. And so I guess it's like a really difficult trivia show.
Oh,
that kind of like takes Jeopardy, but it's like one question at a time, and like contestants have to like really go through it, and there's like thought, and it almost feels like SAT questions in a game show situation. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I am intrigued by it. I probably will watch an episode or two because I gotta feel elitist. So, all right. So
tell me about your mother.
Yeah. Pulls out notebook. Yeah. Calls my therapist. Yeah. What do you call it? Okay, so last week on
What Do You Know with Nick and Devin?
Tea dances. Governor.
Governor.
Pillories. I wonder where they went with that.
Mother claps.
Boy, does she. And this week we'll be talking about...
Perfect.
So last time for part one, we talked about circuit parties, or the beginnings of. So a lot of historical context there, and kind of the way that the gay community kind of found its own in kind of parties and tea and all of these things. So this week we're getting into more modernization and more modern times, and kind of what we kind of think about circuit parties today, and what they might be.
Yeah.
So my question to you isn't necessarily going to be the titular, what do you know about circuit parties? Because I bet you can tell me a couple of things now.
I do know a few things.
One or two. But I'll just ask you in general, how do you feel about either disco music and then kind of like house dance, like club music?
Well... I don't mind any of them. There's a time and place for each of them. Disco music isn't my favorite out of what you listed off.
Fair.
There are a few good tunes.
Yeah.
One of my favorite memories is I'll call it one of my favorite memories just for the sake of storytelling.
I can't wait for the audience to be like, great.
Yeah,
really,
exactly.
really selling this one.
You lived a sad life. I was hanging out in my apartment with a few friends, and we were just playing some music, playing games, etc. And like a classic disco track came on. It's like 8 minutes long, as a lot of disco tracks are. And my friend was like, man, how did people dance for 8 minutes? Like, dance so long to this song? Like, because it was a disco song, like dancing to it. And Allie was like, cocaine, drugs, That's how. It's
Truly.
huge in the disco scene. And that's my memory.
Again, folks, great core memory for Devin here.
We're having
One
a
of the
good
many,
time. But I do enjoy like a few club and techno electronic songs, mostly like Daft Punk, coming out of the French techno scene. And Justice, another French techno band. I feel like a lot of like the best ones are French.
I was waiting for you to be like MGMT, Passion Pit. And I'd be like, okay.
Those are also great.
Yeah, there it is. There it is.
I listened to a lot of those.
2000s,
yeah, I listened to a lot of those in high school. So like those were big for playing during parades.
I was talking to someone. I think Passion Pit just played at like Northerly Island, and they were like, "Oh, I saw Passion Pit the other day." I was like,
What year is it?
Right. I was like, they're still playing. Like, I'm going to like a Cage the Elephant concert like next week, and I was like, Cage the Elephant? What's happening? What is going on?
Right. NSYNC is back together. You know.
Truly wild. Okay, so you feel like time and place. So you're not opposed to them, but more so like specific like artists and tunes, and then like time or place for that music.
Yeah. Every now and then I'm like, oh, I have an itch to like listen to some of the early Justice bands or Justice albums or Daft Punk albums. You know.
Now, do you use certain music for certain activities?
Oh yeah.
Like when you like exercise, you use something specific, or like when you're doing chores, like usually it's like these themes of music, or it's just kind of eclectic.
For like working out and chores, there isn't really a like discerning factor into what music I listen to. Usually if it's like working out, it's a little bit more higher energy music, of course. But like if I'm writing for either the podcast or like D&D or whatever, I'll put on like, of course, like either lo-fi or synthwave music.
Incredible.
Midnight Time Cop, 1983, awesome bands. But like it's really only like for those instances.
Sure, that's fair. I get that. Now, if you, my last question for you as we have this conversation, if you were to throw your own party, what type of music would theme the event, or what kind of theme in general would your party be?
You know, it's probably okay. Is it like a big party? Is it like a kickback? What are we doing here?
Let's say big party.
Big party. I think you got to hit all the bangers. All the classics.
And by classics, you do mean
obviously.
I was like, yes, all of the generic classics.
Yeah, obviously. Every other track is the Black Eyed Peas.
He's just pump it. Every other track,
throw in Fergie every now and then. And then Will.i.am. I think those are the only two that had solo careers.
Truly.
No, I think in my older age, I've really appreciated like the drinking country songs of the early 2000s. Those are really fun.
So just like all Kid Rock is what I'm hearing.
Oh God, no, never. He is banned from my Spotify. I've blocked him.
I've actually blocked him.
Absolutely.
Yes. We're gonna keep it at your outdoor parties are just Jimmy Buffett's discography.
Fine.
Which I feel like we really need to get you out of the country. That is rough. You got to pick up already. This is a whole spiral I'm hearing. All right. Well, speaking of parties. We're going to dive into disco parties.
Okay.
So this was kind of like the proto circuit party.
Sure.
So, sure. As gay men were more accepted and, I wrote tolerated, and legal prosecutions.
Far from tolerated.
Fair. And legal protections were placed around the community. The need to hide was no longer necessary. So, December 21st, 1969, just 6 months after the Stonewall riots, the Gay Activist Alliance was formed by Jim Owls, Marty Robinson, Arthur Evans, Arthur Bell, and 15 others.
Okay.
A lot of people.
Yeah.
They were disaffected by the Gay Liberation Front. So, basically, meaning like these organizations felt that the GLF was unfocused on too many issues.
Okay.
So like little accomplishments on top of that, but GLF tried to align itself with anti-war protesters, the Black Panthers. Like, yes, we wanted to kind of be able to protest and advocate for minority groups. However, like they felt like it was too much, and they really wanted to focus on gay issues.
Right.
Right. So GAA became the most influential American gay activist organization in the early 1970s. So their preamble actually states, quote, "We as liberated homosexual activists demand the freedom for expression of our dignity and value as human beings through confrontation with and disarmament of all mechanisms which unjustly inhibit us, economic, social, and political. Before the public conscience, we demand an immediate end to all oppression of homosexuals and the immediate unconditional recognition of these basic rights: the right to own our feelings, the right to love, the right to be to our own bodies, and the right to be persons."
Oh.
It's very wordy. I feel like I wrote it. But they had a whole preamble, constitution, all of these things to really kind of force or like really lead the charge, right? So the GAA and the GLF were more confrontational in nature when focusing on the liberation of gay people.
Sure.
So they coordinated what they called the ZAP, or like ZAPs, right? Very theater.
Zip, zap, top. Right.
So a ZAP was a direct, surprise public confrontation with political figures and corporate and governmental entities regarding gay rights and discrimination, designed to gain gay and straight media attention. So a hybrid of media theater and political demonstrations. So they did a couple of them kind of throughout New York, but really was to garner attention in a very like public way.
Sure.
For these rights.
Yeah.
Right. So GAA was actually headquartered out of an old firehouse in Soho from 1971 to 1974. So the firehouse acted as a community center during these years and hosted numerous social events.
Okay.
So weekly Saturday night dances where crowds were said to be as large as 1,500 people.
At a firehouse?
At a firehouse.
How do they get out for emergencies?
So it was like multi-leveled. So typically like the basement was kind of like headquartered. The first floor was kind of where the dances were. Then the second and third, and it was tiered.
Okay. Yeah. I was picturing like parties outside since there were so many people and like in front of the garage doors for the firehouse.
No, they still needed to keep a little bit of a low presence. Yeah. So, but they did have like kind of these large gatherings, right? And so it was so crowded and hot in the firehouse during these dances that people began taking their shirts off, and the beginning of circuit parties as we see it today kind of began.
Whoa.
Right? So typically circuit parties tend to be a little bit more like clothing minimal situations.
Sure.
Yeah. So some attributes can kind of link back to this. It does get very hot in there too, so it makes sense.
When you're moving and grooving.
When you're moving and grooving and taking a lot of drugs, it gets hot. So this, along with Firehouse Flicks on Friday nights, provided income for the group's activities. So the Firehouse was designated as a New York City landmark in 2019.
Oh.
Well. I know. Kind of nice. So after Stonewall and Julius's Sip In, a time where the gay community can have their own clubs without police interference, obviously started. So tech advances with sound systems and DJ equipment was on the rise, and it was easier and more attractive to open dance spaces. So New York had thousands of men begin to gather at downtown loft spaces that popped up with dances, right?
Yeah.
So because people can move equipment around, right? So we can say, I have a loft space here, or I have an event space here, and kind of bop around and have these pop-up dances that happen. So Flamingo and 12 West became two of the most prominent gay male dance spaces in New York. I said perfect names. So men that actually had money to like own a house on Fire Island were able to go to Fire Island, and it kind of became the place to go, the place to be. It was kind of, and still is kind of, affluent in some ways, right? And so if you had the money and the means, you could go to Fire Island, and those also had dance parties and all those things. Yeah. So DJs were testing new music at parties on the island. Roy Thode inventing the EP by looping a song back and forth until it filled one entire side of an album. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So disco parties started to pop up during the late 70s and into the early 80s. So lasting only one night, they were held in large venues in typically metro areas with large gay populations.
Okay.
So you have Stonewall happening in 69. You have, obviously, legalities changing. So the beginning of the 70s were kind of these like pop-up things,
Sure.
right? And a little bit more self-hosted, GA having the firehouse and all of those things. The firehouse actually was, the interior was destroyed by arson. Homophobia.
Ironic. Okay.
Also ironic. Bold. Ironic homophobia. And so, how novel. Be more creative with your homophobia. Thank you. So that's kind of when those pop-ups kind of happened. And then that's when also Flamingo and 12 West kind of became more prominent as well, kind of spurring that, right? But then people were like, well, we can kind of be a little bit more permanent, right, as we get into the 70s and 80s to kind of be out and about, right, or the late 70s. So Andrew Holleran's 1978 novel Dancer from the Dance marked the first time the term circuit was named in a book. So stemming from the idea that these parties and dances were part of the, quote, need-to-know circuit. So not only discos, but in the know places in the gay community.
Nothing to do with races.
Nothing to do with races. Or Short Circuit, the robot.
Yeah, that too.
Just throwing it out there.
And it wasn't a circus.
All of the above. So even small things like barbershops were a part of the circuit. In the sense of like gay community spaces.
Yeah, well, barbershops have always been like a conversation pit of sort.
Right. So New York, of course, had Flamingo and 12 West, as we talked about.
Sure.
But Paradise Garage and the Saint also
St. Louis?
Nope, all in New York.
Fuck.
That would have been perfect, though. Paradise Garage and the Saint also having theme-centered gay parties busted onto the scene. So the latter were kind of as massive as Studio 54, but flew under the radar because circuit parties kind of were always underground. Right. The Saint in the East Village renovated the renowned Fillmore East Theater, which featured a dome-covered dance floor and was suspended in mid-air and a complete planetarium mechanism that projected a starscape onto the dome.
Wild.
Wow. But that's also kind of where, like, the production of some of these parties started, right?
Yeah.
Because before it's just like, let's all get together and dance, and I'm sure like mood lighting and things like that, but this was the first time where it was like, oh, this is like a production. You know
Before
what I mean?
someone's just standing in the corner flicking the light switch.
Right. Nosferatu, right? But this kind of, because they leaned into the space they were in, it allowed for like a better experience, and then that kind of just became the expectation and the norm in some ways.
Right.
So although the Saint was open every weekend, the once monthly marathon parties drew gay men from around the world, starting the idea of a disco party being the focal point of a weekend getaway in the gay community. So as the rest of the U.S.-based gay community, usually closeted, traveled to New York in search of some kind of release and freedoms and expression and all that, they would find these circuit parties and then bring what they experienced back home to their cities.
Sure.
That's kind of how it started to like permeate out across the country, right? These mega clubs developed the night into afternoon musical journey that would become to be known and expected at circuit parties. So there was a musical arc to the evening.
Night to afternoon.
Yeah, so
That's too long.
I talk about it a little later, but like you can go from like a noon to 5 event, a 5 to 9 event, a 9 to 4 event, and then a 4 to like 11 or noon event. So like they tend to be different, right?
Sure.
In like a kind of, so you're able to like go different places, but some of them will go from like 5 p.m. until like 6 a.m. and then there's like an after party from like 6 a.m. to like 11, 12. Yeah.
Ugh, no.
But again,
no, thank
how
you.
can you dance that long? Drugs.
Still.
It's
too many people. Being around in the same space for too long.
We show up at 9. You're like, hey, it's 9:45. Are we gonna wrap this up?
9:10.
Right. I have a bedtime to get to. Yeah.
I have a book to read at home.
The flip through. Okay. So, a conscious note to kind of mention at the time is also uptown in Harlem, the ballroom scene was flourishing. The ballroom scene is a whole topic in and of itself, right?
Yes.
But I want to just kind of mention ballroom often informed and influenced the circuit from terms like using like fierceness, kind of started entering some like gay culture and things even with the whites downtown, right?
Yeah.
Dance moves and performers such as Power Infinity, Kitty Meow, and Flava and Kevin Aviance.
Oh.
I was like, Kevin. But they held a large influence on the circuit. And I feel like we see that a lot, where black culture often kind of gets pulled into
of course.
white culture and others. And so I kind of want to make a note that a lot of circuit, not only from like a party perspective and a dance perspective, but like just culture and things and terms kind of come from ballroom and black gay culture.
Yeah.
So, so that's kind of what's happening in New York, right? And again, this is kind of late 70s going to early 80s. So Corbett Reynolds is a Columbus, Ohio-based artist and nightclub owner, also founded a disco night in the late 70s. So Reynolds envisioned a one-night party to end all parties, centered and designed around this.
Says every frat boy every year.
This night will end all other nights.
Oh my God.
Into a keg stand. Yeah. So he centered and designed around the theme of the color red. This would be known as, they titled it the Red Party. Oh. And he held it at his nightclub named Rudely Elegant, which, perfect.
Yeah, that's a good name.
Yeah. So the Red Party was so successful that it actually filled the Valleydale Dance Hall to its 1,000-person capacity.
Oh.
I know. Which I was like, that's rough. Like, imagine like promoting a party at the Valleydale Dance Hall, but you're also in Columbus, Ohio, so you get what you get. So drawing so many outside visitors to Columbus, Ohio, it became an annual event and even outlived the closure of the dance hall in the early 1980s. Yeah, the dance hall was actually really big, like for big bands and like swing and that sort of thing.
Sure.
And so as we got into the 80s, it started to, of course, decline. And so Red Party took it over. It closed, but then became a landmark in like the early to mid 80s.
Sure.
So the Red Party was known for Reynolds' creative partyscapes completely done in red. So on the 25th anniversary, where the theme was to be Rome, Reynolds unfortunately died. Oh. Which kind of feels fitting, both as it's the 25th year, so like a big landmark year, right? And as a Rome theme, like kind of the fall of Rome, crimson red,
fair,
death. You know what I mean? I was like sad, but like
fits.
at least it kind of like fit the theme.
Yeah,
he like stayed strong with it. Maybe he planned it. Just kidding. So the estate debated about continuing the event. They were like, okay, he's passed. We're in control of his estate. Should we keep it going? But they decided to retire it and leave it to history. Which I will say, and I kind of want to go on a rant for a quick second.
Go ahead.
I hate that like social media has pulled so many things out of the existence of its moment. So like I think most recently, like Brian was showing me a TikTok video of the Olympic muffins, like those like chocolate muffins in the Olympics, like became so like infamous and everybody loved them at the Olympics and all of those things. So then New York Times like, here's a recipe on how to make, and I'm like, let the muffin exist in its place. Like it was a thing that the Olympians enjoyed. Like it has its moment and its memory. Yeah. But like you recreating them at home, I get it. Like sharing things with people, it's a connectivity sort of thing. But like I just feel like nothing's like in its moment anymore. Yeah, kind of. You know what I mean? Like at any point you can kind of just like take something out of its moment and let it kind of exist in other people's experiences, and it just doesn't have the same sort of weight.
Well, you know that muffin isn't going to taste as good.
Right.
Because it's not in Paris.
It's not in Paris. You're not like in the Olympics. You're not like, you don't have that anxiety. You don't have all that experience around it. So that's where I go like, people are going to then experience and be like, I don't understand why this muffin was so, and it's just like, it wasn't for you. The muffin wasn't for you. The muffin was for the Olympians. They talked about how they liked it. End of list. Like, does that make sense? Like, I don't know. I think it really got me like agitated the other night.
That's okay.
It was like 11:30 p.m. in bed, and I was just like, "What the?"
That's too late to be that mad over a muffin.
I'm just saying, like, just let it be. And so, like, I'm happy that they decided to say, like, I don't think we need to continue this and let this turn into something like that wasn't its initial intent. So we're gonna leave it where it was and let it sit in history as 24 years of the Red Party, hosted by Reynolds. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's all I'm saying.
That I get. Okay. The muffin.
I'm just saying. The muffin really pissed me off. Anyway.
Clearly.
Anyway, at the start of the AIDS crisis...
AIDS.
Always have that card to play.
Yeah.
So, at the start of the AIDS crisis... We are actually going to talk about that now. At the start of the AIDS crisis, in the early 80s, people felt disaster was rolling in. Of course. People in the community were suddenly dying, and on Fire Island, empty houses became more frequent.
Oh.
The Saint and the George took a major hit, right? With an early name for AIDS being the Saint's disease.
Oh.
I don't know. You can't really come back from that.
Yeah.
At the first, their ability to stay afloat was kind of a glimmer, but by the second party season, it had decimated the club's membership. The clubs closed in 1987 and 1988.
Yeah.
So while people were traumatized by the loss of so many friends dying so rapidly, they then became defiant and began dancing for a cause, for resistance. So several benefit parties sprang up around the country to bring the community together collectively. So these parties were led by volunteer organizations looking to donate proceeds to HIV/AIDS related charities.
Right.
So some of the first were Halloweens in New Orleans. I think it's supposed to be Halloweens in New Orleans.
Oh,
Little rhymey, rhythmic thing. Fire Island's Morning Party and Hotlanta. Kind of want to go to Hotlanta. So the success of the first parties and disco parties inspired other events to be hosted, especially expanding to other cities, each with their own respective themes. Color kind of, I think, spawning off of the Red Party, color as a theme kind of became an expectation. So
gotta wonder what St. Louis was like.
You're really holding on to St. Louis. So the White Party was in Miami, the Black Party in New York, the Blue Ball in Philly, the Black and Blue Festival in Montreal, the White Diamonds Party in Palm Springs. Go ahead.
I'm just stuck on the Blue Ball.
Isn't that great?
It's something.
Come on, they knew what they were doing. Pretty great. So many also centered around events as well to kind of make it a whole weekend experience, right? So the Southern Decadence Festival in New Orleans, Folsom Street Fair in San Francisco, as well as, we have things in Chicago like IML and Market Days.
Right.
So these dance parties provided an entertainment or environment where gay men could process the crisis of HIV/AIDS and still experience community.
Yeah.
A communal space a communal response to an epidemic.
Right.
Which is great. It kind of fostered
that's good.
hope and faith and resistance and all those things. So while it began as benefits, it of course quickly shifted to becoming commercialized as well. Yeah. So by the early 90s, the popularity of circuit parties started to take off. Some cities were having a circuit party every weekend before expanding overseas to places like Montreal, Barcelona, London. The White Party in Miami becoming extremely popular as celebrities discovered South Beach and kind of like Latin culture, and thus discovering the event. So it was even condemned in Congress by a conservative Republican representative from California, which I was like, wow, popular. So I was like, how do you know about the party, though? Interesting. Are you a Molly House spy?
Right.
Provocateur. So this isn't surprising, as this was the same time the rave scene was taking off.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So acid house music was becoming popular, especially in Europe.
Yeah, of course.
So for a second, I'm going to take it back to like house music and acid house music and kind of quickly where that came from, because of course there's a lot of content there, and then go into some like the rave aspect. So house music in and of itself originated in the late 70s, early 80s here in Chicago, baby.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, in the black gay community at places like the Warehouse, the Power Plant, and the Playground.
Right.
So Frankie Knuckles and Ron Hardy, being DJs and major developers, started by alternating disco songs to give them a more mechanical beat, which Frankie Knuckles is a great DJ name. A great DJ name.
Yeah.
So slowly, as more DJs took on and put their own spin on house music, acid music began to be produced for acid house parties.
Okay.
So acid house parties were illegal parties staged in warehouses between 1987 to 1989 and played acid house music and acid techno. The term originates either from the song Acid Tracks by Future, which is a Chicago house music group.
Sure.
Or due to the consumption of MDMA and LSD at the parties. I think it's a little combo of both.
Both?
Yeah. Just throwing it out there.
It's interesting that it was, again, black creators that made the house music. Because, I mean, that's also how hip-hop came to be, of course, as well, is that they were remixing old disco records that were being thrown out or whatever, bought cheap, and looping and scratching and whatnot, with those records, and that's what created hip hop.
Hip hop
was created looping those beats.
Yeah, I think it's also crazy. I mean, one, I think that Black culture is just so rooted in so many things today.
Oh yeah,
especially when it comes to like trends and like popular things and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think it's crazy that it all kind of rooted itself in Chicago.
Yeah,
especially thinking of like,
well, hip hop was the Bronx.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, house music for me.
Okay.
Yes, but hip hop in the Bronx. But I think it's interesting because I think of like Disco Demolition Night at Comiskey.
Yeah.
And then like how that kind of was like hard pass on disco, and we were like, okay, let's start like reformatting some of these things. So it's kind of cool. And then of course dripping into that was a good use of a verb. Dripping into acid techno and like acid house. That was good. That was off the dome, baby. I didn't even realize it. That was good. So, Chicago house music / acid music artists suddenly began experiencing overseas success.
Yeah.
So, acid house spreads first to clubs, warehouses, and free parties in Manchester in the mid-'80s, and then later arriving in London. After London, it arrived in New York, which I think was crazy, to go from Chicago to Manchester, and then Manchester, London, London to New York. But it also shows, I think, a lot. I mean, even like last episode, contextually talking about kind of the US and the UK, like how much we kind of feed off of each other in a lot of ways.
Sure.
Especially in terms of kind of cultural things or like within the gay community and stuff. A lot of times those things will kind of get passed back and forth.
Yeah.
And now I'll say even like looping some of Spain in there as well. And we'll kind of talk about like Madrid, Barcelona, and stuff like that. So it was kind of weird to see that it went overseas before it even hit New York.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking on like the sharing of the music and stuff like that, even like with the British invasion and punk music, like you have, I know like for that era, like you talk about all these British bands, Beatles, etc., coming over to America, but there was also a popularity of American punk going over to London and the UK and stuff like that. So
I didn't even know that.
Oh, yeah.
That's cool.
Here we go.
What'd you know? So Chicago house music and acid music artists. I said this already. Acid music spread. I already said that. By the late 80s.
You already said that.
God damn it. By the late 80s, rave was adopted to describe the subculture that grew out of the acid house parties.
Yeah.
So these acid house parties and raves were for everyone, though. Straights, gays alike. It kind of just encompassed the whole gamut, right?
Sure.
So with raves themselves moving from the UK to the US by the late 80s, early 90s, arriving in larger cities and then smaller ones, the melding of the subculture and massive dance parties only seemed fitting, right? So disco parties died, as did disco. And promoters expanded the current scene into huge productions featuring DJs and performers. Also, the rise of drugs in rave culture, such as acid, ecstasy, LSD, etc., also made its way over to circuit parties.
Okay.
Not to say that drugs weren't present previously. I think especially like cocaine was probably, and speed was probably pretty rampant.
Yeah.
But I think that psychedelics and some of these kind of like dopamine receptor sort of things made its kind of transition back and forth, right?
Yeah, I mean, the government was spreading them around enough. It was bound to make it everywhere else.
Exactly. Thanks, Reagan. It all comes back. Yeah. So here's where promoters also turned these parties into either a weekend affair or a long continuous party. So kind of just reiterating, there could be like a pool party from 12 to 5, and then a tea dance from 5 to 9, the main event from 9 to 4 a.m., and then an afters from 4 a.m. to 12 p.m., and then the cycle just continues.
See, that's a little too late. I was on board for the pool party and then the tea party afterwards.
Oh, you were there until 12 to 9.
Yeah.
You're all for it.
I'm there.
But you can't do the 9 to 4.
No.
Too much.
I'd be done.
Could you pause on the main and then go to the afters?
I don't want to miss my pool time.
I have a slot at the pool.
I like my pool time.
I also feel like I can't imagine missing the main event and then going to the afters where everyone's just like so messed up.
Right, that's
and
just
you're
walking into a mistake.
That's awful. Yeah. There's nothing worse when you're the sober person in a room full of drunk high people.
It's awful.
Yeah, you're just like, why the fuck am I here? Right.
And then you like try to catch up, but there's no catching up.
There's no catching up. Right. Or all of a sudden then you're blacked out and everyone else is coming down.
Right,
and you're like, I'm the messy one now. And it's a whole mess. Yeah, exactly. So with such large productions, though, comes a larger ticket price tag. So sometimes these like weekend-long affairs could be like $400 a ticket because you're getting into so many different parties. You know what I mean?
Right.
So to them, they're kind of like, oh, well, you're getting into 10 different parties. So, of course, it's $400 a ticket, but you're also like, that's a lot of fucking money. You know what I mean?
It is.
Yeah. Which only just continues to grow.
Of course.
Right. So we're going to talk a little about the peak and then the decline.
Okay.
So between 1999 and 2000s, circuit parties had reached their peak for the time. So the total number of events has never reached the amount it had between 99 and 2000s. However, oversaturation started and people began to save and choose to attend only the massive events. But even then, the scene started to steadily decline.
Yeah.
So larger events started to fall, such as the Red Party, Fireball, Hot Lanta, the Morning Party, Hellball, Reunion, and Motorball.
What about Blue Ball?
Still going strong.
God bless them.
Strong blue ball. Strong blue ball. A few factors to decline being called out, such as the original audience from the 80s and 90s was getting older.
Yeah.
They're like, I can't fucking do this anymore.
Yeah.
And didn't have an active interest in multi-day partying. Fair. Prime example right here.
Same.
Yeah. So after, also this is just like so weird to say. Also after 9/11.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, a recession hit and travel restrictions were put into place, so attendance was much harder.
Yeah. It's all fair.
It's all fair. So there was also a rise in real estate costs at the time. It escalated in cities.
Yeah. Oh, incredible.
It's just weird to be like, so post 9/11 circuit parties looked like this.
Right.
Yeah. So new effective treatments for HIV and AIDS also changed the kind of communal experience of being like, you know, shoving money at, it still happened, but you know what I mean? It started to kind of dissipate. 2003 was the rise of the internet. So circuit parties were not needed as a means to help the gay dating scene.
Yeah.
You need to like find people and socialize with people there, right? And all gay cruises also began to pop up and attracted a lot of attention, with each cruise having the capacity for up to 1,500 passengers. And these cruises, I mean, today are like insane.
I can imagine.
They also get really like scary as well, because recently there's been a kind of flood of lethal like fentanyl through some of the drugs that are getting like brought on board. And so I will say, for those of you that participate like in any sort of circuit party and sort of like gay cruise, something like that, any sort of party where there's drugs, I guess, just be careful. Know where the drugs are coming from.
Any drug consumption.
Right.
Yeah, be careful.
Just be careful. So I think there was a death, maybe a couple. But there was, it's gotten kind of rough.
Yikes.
So today these can be, week-long excursions, right? With up to 2,000 passengers to popular travel destinations. So they're like, I can go to like a circuit party all day as the boat travels to, you know, the Caribbean. Right. And then get off, see the Caribbean, get back. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like this huge...
Sounds more fun.
Week-long festival. It sounds like... just like, get me off. Because, like, I'm sure there's no place for, like, peace. Like, maybe Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I'll go out, I'll party. But, like, Sunday night, like, I just want to... Like, I mean, just, like, chill.
Right, there's no, like, unless you're in your cabin.
And then even then, I'm sure, like, behind your headboard, it's like, shut the fuck up. Christ. Yeah. Just like, Jesus, I might as well go now. So, where circuit parties became more fixated were around solidified gay festivals and weekend-long events, kind of like I was talking about before.
Sure.
So, the Black and Blue Festival in Montreal, Folsom, IML Market Days, Pride Weekends, things like that. So, instead of just kind of these standalones, they were like, okay, if these festivals are going to continue and be prosperous, then let's send our circuit parties around those as well.
Makes sense.
And kind of combo them.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So that was kind of the decline. So we really saw a dip into like the mid 2000s, where it was like you only had a couple at some of these festivals really happening, right? But there's been kind of a recent resurgence.
Oh.
So a resurgence is occurring and can be tracked back to leading companies organizing large events in international cities. So Matinee in Barcelona and We Party in Madrid. In 2008, the Matinee Group organized Circuit Festival, which is an annual event that is currently the biggest international gay and lesbian event. So this is where like you kind of see in international cities, circuit parties, I think, yes, there's still more like gay community, queer community focused, but are more akin to a rave where it goes across spectrums versus more tailored and focused towards like gay men.
Sure.
So the Circuit Festival, hosting more than 50 DJs, 12 days long, brings together all leading international circuit brands to Barcelona.
God, that's so much.
It's so much. So much. But it's kind of like this unifying event, and like that kind of brought not only some of these event companies back, but also like circuit parties back into existence, right? Yeah. So since 2012, it continues to attract over 70,000 gay visitors each year.
Damn.
I said, there's that many
crazy.
of us? Christ. No idea.
Yeah.
So while international circuit parties tend to encompass a variety of people in queer community, the U.S. consistently tends to attract large crowds of gay men.
Yeah.
And by tens, I do mean markets directly, too. I mean, you look at some of these marketings, it is just gay men. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And more notably now, there's at least diversity in race on these marketings, but previously it really was white gay men.
Yeah.
Right. So the U.S. saw a notable resurgence in the 2010s, and circuit parties were back on the scene. Circuit parties today, depending on the size, can often host celebrity performers or headliners, including, of course, gay icons. Right. So some of these parties continue to be used to raise funds benefiting HIV health-related charities and programs, but there are, of course, some that are for profit. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking to attend one, look up if they're donating anything to charity or if it's kind of for profit. Not to say you need to go one over the other, but maybe go to the charity one. Maybe spend your money there.
Yeah. Go to circuit parties for a cause.
Right. Exactly. Do drugs for a cause. Okay. So from the lighting to the music to performers or productions to decor and large venue spaces, obviously it can be quite expensive. Mm-hmm. So that's why if you see a large price ticket, typically why that's happening. So a little bit of the culture and controversy associated with these circuit parties. So Vice deemed circuit parties as parties where, quote, gay men seek sex and freedom. I said, that feels a little dramatic. Yeah, inflated. I was like, I think they're just looking for a good time.
Right.
And more in the sex part than the freedom part. So with that said, members of the gay and the medical communities have expressed concerns about the culture of high drug use and mood changers at these parties. So
fair.
Alcohol, weed, methamphetamines, ecstasy, ketamine, GHB, poppers, and a host of other party drugs. GHB had actually a huge influence on the scene and still kind of does, and got scary when many men were falling out from it. So like fully just passing out.
Yeah.
There was a documentary I think they did in like the early 2000s where you just saw like person after person just like falling out because of like just the lack of control in utilizing GHB. So for safety, it has become commonplace for promoters of these parties to hire medical professionals and station them outside venues in anticipation of drug overdoses, dehydration, and or alcohol poisoning. You hope it doesn't happen, but better be prepared than to not, right? So with the use of drugs, inhibitions loosen and judgment is impaired, which can also lead to unsafe sex and potential STIs. Unsafe sex is also just a major concern in general in the gay community, right? So safe sex. Do it. Circuit parties tend to be blamed for the spread of drug abuse in the gay community, especially meth, as well as the transmission of STIs, particularly HIV, among gay men.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than walking into a party and someone offering you meth. And you're like, now this is a downer. Right. You know what I mean? Like,
I can't say no. It's rude.
Is this meth or weed? What's in the bomb? Okay? So, while technically these parties are open to anyone, they're generally viewed as social events primarily for fit, masculine, gay men, more often white as well.
Yeah.
So, outsiders tend to perceive circuit parties as highly superficial. Other members in the gay community who do not attend circuit parties often target and negatively judge those that do attend. So with a high amount of promiscuous sex and drug use, outsiders tend to look down on or scoff at those who do attend, often thinking that the ones that do attend are the elitist ones, which I think is funny, right? Like you're like looking down and then scoffing at them about this drug use and promiscuity, but you are the one that thinks they're elitist because they're like fit and ripped and, you know, all this masculine energy,
the party,
right? All of those things, right? So it's this weird like dichotomy, like rooted in its like own like elitism, right?
Yeah.
I will say that I think that, like, from my experience, I do understand that I feel like the way that circuit parties are marketed and the way that circuit parties, like, I've seen are definitely more attributed to fit men and masculine men.
Sure.
And it's not to say that, like, sometimes you just don't feel comfortable entering a space like that because you feel like you'll be judged entering that space.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I feel like you said earlier that it was a little bit more clothing optional.
Correct.
And I feel like anywhere where that is, even if it's a pool or something like that, the beach, etc., where like you could be wearing a swimsuit, etc., where you just might not feel comfortable in exposing yourself in that way, kind of a situation.
Totally. I mean, there's like some bars, like outside of circuit parties, there's some bars that are like, okay, you have to take your shirt off, or you have to be wearing like leather, or you have to be doing this,
Right,
and it's
yeah.
like. And I don't think, and I get it, like bars and private spaces, you want to curate a certain experience and environment, and that I understand. But like when you're not comfortable in your body, it's hard to then go to those places and be like, oh, that's fine.
Fun.
Yeah, let me do that. But then you can't get in if you don't do that.
Right.
So it's kind of like this weird, like, I now already feel bad. And now you're like rejecting me because of something that I feel bad about.
Yeah.
Right. And so then you kind of just like fall deeper. And I think that does kind of like run in the gay community outside of circuit parties as well, is something to kind of just, have a conversation about. Right.
Yeah.
I think it's getting better. I think there's obviously more to go. But at least we can say that like inclusivity and the ability to kind of look beyond someone's body, or you yourself being more confident in your body in
that's
certain
always
spaces, right, is getting better. I think, especially with the younger generation, which is appreciated.
Sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, we'll see. So, as we kind of talked about some of the judgments from those who did not really attend the parties or look down on the parties, in 1988, Larry Kramer, who's a gay author playwright, I don't know if that sounds familiar.
It does.
He wrote an article for the New York Times after attending the morning party on Fire Island, and with his remarks, actually helped the party get shut down.
Oh,
I was like, you bitch. Same as when bathhouses were shut down in the early part of the AIDS epidemic, where they should have been used for education instead of being closed.
Yeah.
So again, like I get it. Like some people are like, these are places where people are overdosing, people are like getting STIs that's running rampant. Like there's so many like negative kind of aspects to this that they're like, these need to get shut down.
Yeah.
Same thing happened with bathhouses, right? Like it's a transmission center, but instead of like seeing the positivity in them, they just kind of were like, shut it down.
Only
be
negatives.
done with it.
Yeah.
Right. So, and he and others thought that these party goers should grow up and start settling down. And it's like,
excuse the
sounds
fuck
like
out
you're
of you.
a party fucking pooper.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So, yeah, wild, Larry. So, gay men who frequently attend circuit parties are also often referred to as circuit queens, which this can be both derogatory and humorous, depending on the context.
Sure.
So, like, you and your friends can call each other a circuit queen, but, like, if I went up to someone who, like, goes, I'm like, such a circuit queen. You know what I mean? So, yeah. It's interchangeable.
I can't imagine the context of, like, calling someone a circuit queen in an insult. Because, like, you yourself might, like, come and meet someone at a circuit party and be like, they're such a circuit queen. But, like, I don't know. It's like all of the above. It's like ironic humor, regular, like, friend humor, derogatory. Right.
It's wild. So these faults continue to be noted, and while some may never change, other parties that lend themselves to more inclusive environments have begun to pop up. So kind of, I would say like Gen Z, more queer coded events tend to pop up a little bit as well. So with a younger generation coming out earlier and having a wider breadth of friends identifying as everything from straight to gay to trans to lesbian to non-binary, young people will adjust things to their needs. Yeah. Right? So like, I'm not going to, as a gay man and as 22, I'm not going to alienate my straight, trans, and lesbian friends just because I want to go to this party. Right? Whereas before, I think millennials were kind of the tail end of this, where finding community within the gay world was still really prominent. But because it's so much more accepted in the younger generation, it's just not as necessary, right? Like, we don't need to find community within our own anymore because it's not so repressed as it was. Yeah. There's still aspects.
Oh, yeah.
But,
I mean, well, I swear this connects.
Can't wait.
I'm watching Fast and the Furious series for the first time in my life.
Okay.
It's interesting. But like the first one, The Fast and the Furious,
Yes.
Came out in 2001, before 9/11.
Pre 9/11.
And like, granted, you and I were in like third grade.
Yeah.
At that time, but like in the first 5 minutes of that movie, Paul Walker's character was called a faggot in like as an insult in the first 5 minutes, and like that was just like, here we go, just like throwing it out as an insult. So I think like what you're saying, or adding to what you're saying, is like the millennials, us, were part of the kind of like the petering out of the culture of just casually throwing out that word in the first 5 minutes of the Fast and the Furious.
Sure.
To where the Gen Z is, we've paved kind of the way of having a culture where it's a lot more accepted of being queer and whatnot.
100%. Your use of faggot felt very like a lot of bigotry in that.
You know,
Not really aggressive. Just kidding.
My favorite word to use online.
Favorite use of word online. But yeah, no, 100%. So I think that especially as they're starting to get older, right, and starting to create some of these spaces, because they're attending these parties and trying to shift a norm, there's always going to be friction in that.
Right.
And so I think some of it is shifting a norm. Some of it is also just they're like, well, we'll create our own space.
Yeah.
Right? Just as gays did.
Right.
You know, this new generation is like, well, this doesn't fit what I need. So let's build our own.
Do it our own. Yeah.
Right. So circuit parties are much more diverse than when they started, but still there's more inclusion to be had.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, as varying groups create their own parties, the Black community, queer community, etc., is that individualism okay, or should all parties be inclusive no matter what? Which I think is interesting, right? Like, you want to, of course, be inclusive, but you want communities within shared experiences also to have it's important, right? But to what degree is that appropriate, right? Because if I'm in the Black gay community, I want, members of the Black gay community around me because we've had shared experience in that, not only as Black people, but also as gay men or lesbians or whatever that is.
Right. You want your own space.
Right. And then same thing for gays. But I think the line starts to get kind of blurry when you start to say, no, only these people. But where's the line in even that? Right. So I think it's interesting. I think that there, of course, is something where to be said where it's, hey, this might be predominantly for gay men, but of course we're going to be inclusive to others. Yeah. Just don't be a dick about it. Right. You know what I mean? I think that's a major thing. And a lot of times, unfortunately, gay men can be dicks about it, especially white gay men. You know what I mean? So circuit parties, the last things I'll say is circuit parties can be very important social events for some in the gay community. So I'm looking forward to particular ones all year. Especially, when kind of alluding back to like the beginning of disco parties, some people who live in more kind of repressed areas where it's uncomfortable being out or it's not an option or things of that nature, look forward to traveling to these events because it allows them to be open. Yeah. Right? And so they can be described as a celebration of gay life and gay sexuality and expression of freedom, and as a statement of the power and strength of the gay communities. The future of circuit parties, especially in the States, under a divisive culture war and repressive government, these dance parties will probably increase. A lot of protest involves dance. Yeah. So that's it. That's circuit parties. And kind of we'll see where the evolution and resurgence kind of goes from here. But I totally get it, where dance kind of roots itself in and of it in a way of protest, right? We see that in dance parties. It's just a way to kind of express ourselves and be free and in movement and all of those things, and the ability to kind of meet people and gather and be social. And so that in and of itself can be a protest. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
We'll see.
Yeah. But that's all I got for you, Dev. So circuit parties, like, again, as I said in my mini-sode, if you go to a circuit party, please stay safe, stay hydrated, and just have fun.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for sticking around. Everybody listening, please like, follow, and subscribe. WDYK_podcast on all social media sites. Make sure to rate and review us. We'd love to hear your comments, as well as that helps us get a boost and engagement. So, and spread to more wonderful people. Don't you want all your friends to know about us? Shared experiences.
I do.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I have. Thanks so much. I will talk to you later. Bye.
Okay, bye.